In this week's episode, we are going to turn this into this.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Hope you liked the intro. I'm super excited about this tutorial, but I don't want to waste any more of your time, so let's jump right into Lightroom and be sure to stick around because this video is going to be jam-packed with helpful tips. Alright, now that we are in Lightroom, we can start with the photo editing of this image. The first thing that I do with all of my images is to first crop them to their final dimension. In this case, I'm not gonna do that because I like the composition of this photo. As a landscape photographer, I usually have plenty of time to fine-tune my composition on location. And if you can avoid cropping your images, it's always a good thing because you will retain as much quality and as much megapixels as you can. And that's gonna help for the next step where we want to have as many information as possible to do our best photo editing. So let's move on to the basic adjustments. And I wanna just spend a few words about the basic adjustments. Here we are not already editing our picture. Here we are just fixing the problems that we had when shooting. So we want to fix the white balance, we want to fix the exposure, and we want to fix the saturation of our image. I would highly encourage you to avoid using the auto button. Although it might give you a starting point, I think Lightroom does always a over-the-top adjustment, and I really want you to experiment a little bit with this panel. And the secret to do a basic adjustment before we start editing our photo, before we start adding some style to our photo, is to be as subtle as possible with the changes that we do here. So let's start with the white balance adjustment. So I usually use the eyedropper and I try to find an area of my image that has neutral colors, and usually clouds are perfect for that. So I'm gonna just pick a point in the clouds, and that's gonna adjust the temperature and the tint of my image. Once I'm done with the white balance, and if Lightroom would mess up this step, I would just eyeball it and basically just move the slider until the white look white in my image basically. Alright, now let's move on to the tone section, and here comes already my first advice. The tone section and the tone curve actually do the exact same adjustments. So I would highly encourage, especially beginners, to not do the same thing twice in Lightroom. So if you are adjusting the exposure, the highlights and the contrast in this section here, don't do that in the tone curve as well. So decide which one of these tools you want to use and use only that one for the adjustment you want to do. I'm going to show you how to do the same adjustment with both tools, so then you can decide which one you want to use and which one you like most. First thing that I want to do is to adjust my exposure, and I want to retain a little bit of the highlights in the sky, so I'm gonna bring the exposure down just a tiny bit. Minus 0.20 looks good. I don't usually use the contrast slider here because, again, the four sliders that are just underneath it are actually doing the same thing, and I don't want to do the same adjustment twice because my image is gonna be overly done if I keep adding contrast every step of the way. So decide which one you want to use. In this case, I'm going to use the four sliders here because they give me a little bit more control, and I'm going to bring down the highlights quite a bit to retain most of the details here in the sky. I'm not going to touch the shadows because there are no harsh shadow that I want to open up or to darken. I feel like as a basic adjustment this is working actually pretty well. And then for the whites, I would also leave them as they are. As you can see here in the histogram, we are already quite close to the right edge, so let's not clip any information in our image. And for the blacks, let's move them just a tiny bit. Again, I don't want to clip them, so just a minor adjustment here would be perfect, something like that. -3 looks pretty good. That's what I would do here in the basic adjustment panel. Remember, here we are just fixing the issues we have on our image. We are not adding style to our image. We are not doing the real photo editing just yet. So be patient, because if we have a base that we can work with, this is gonna pay later on. So don't go too far with the adjustments here. Try only to fix the issue you see in your image. Now, as promised, I'm gonna show you how to do the same thing with the tone curve. So I'm gonna reset these sliders here. Here we go. And so we said we wanna bring down the exposure a little bit. So I'm gonna bring the curve below the diagonal a little bit here in the middle. And then I wanna recover some of the highlights. So I'm gonna bring this down a little bit. And then I wanna darken the blacks a tiny little bit. All right, that's too much. And there we go. Now we have done basically the same exact adjustment with just 3 points on the curve. That's why I actually like curves more than the sliders up here. They give me much more control and I'm much faster at doing that. So I usually skip this section entirely and I go straight to my tone curves, especially because I can also go into the channels, and if there is a tint or a color cast that is on my image that I want to get rid of, I can easily do that with the curves. So let's now move on to the present section, and here I think this is another section where beginners actually messed up quite a lot because they go over the top with all of these sliders. My advice here is to be as subtle as possible with these adjustments. If you want, you can add a little bit of texture and a little bit of clarity, or you can decrease the clarity. Sometimes you can go with negative clarity just to soften up the image a little bit. I actually paid a lot of money to get the sharpest lens that I possibly can, and I paid a lot of money for my camera, so I'm not gonna soften it up. I don't understand why people do that, but in my case, I basically never do that or very rarely do that. So I usually increase the texture just a tiny bit, and I don't use the DAs unless there is some haze in the photo or I want to add actually haze. So I usually use it in the negative section, but I do that with masks and not here on the entire photo. Next thing would be vibrance and saturation. Again, don't do the same thing twice, so decide which one of these sliders you want to use. Vibrance is a little more forgiving because it doesn't saturate the color all in the same way and try to preserve the skin tones of the people in the image. So you usually have like a lighter saturation that I actually like more, so I only use the vibrance slider if I want to add a little bit of colors in my image. As said, I don't touch the saturation, but you can also do the saturation. You just need to move it a little less, and this is gonna saturate all of your colors in the same way. But in this case, I'm gonna bring it back to 0 and I'm gonna add a little bit of vibrance. Plus 15 looks actually pretty good. And that's all I would do for this image to bring it to a level that we can work with. Now we have fixed the problems that our photo had, a little bit the exposure, a little bit the contrast, the black point we brought it a little bit down so that now we have something we can work with. Okay, let's now move on to the next section, and that's gonna be our color grading. Okay, and let's start with the color mixer. So here we are gonna move the orange a little bit to the left. I wanna transform this orange into a brown, very dark brown, so I'm gonna move the hue now towards more red, and then we are gonna adjust saturation and luminance to make this kind of a brown color. So let's do something like -30. I think could look okay. And then let's bring this down a bit. I think -40 looks actually quite good. I want this photo to have a lot more greens, so I'm gonna change the hue of the yellow towards green. Something like this. I think +30 looks actually quite good. Maybe +25 is enough. And then I want to move the greens a little bit towards more yellow, something like that, so that the two colors start to mix into one another. And then we can add a little bit of saturation in the yellow because I want this at the end to be a very acidic kind of lime green. And for the greens we are gonna remove a little bit of saturation. And there is also a little bit of blue here in the back that I don't really like, so I'm gonna bring that down quite a bit, -35. I think it's actually fine. And my lake is now looking quite dull. there is really not that much color in it, and if I use the saturation slider here, I can't really get that much back, and if I use the blue, I'm gonna saturate this area too much. So I'm not gonna do that here, but I'm gonna use the masks to get some of the color back from my lake. So I'm gonna bring this back to -30. I think something like that looks actually quite nice. And then I wanna increase the brightness of the yellows and decrease the brightness of the greens so that we have a little bit more contrast in the scene. Okay, I think I wanna change the yellows even more towards green, something like that, and perhaps also decrease the saturation of the green even more. Something like that actually looks quite good. Then let's move on to color grading. And here I want to give a little more the feeling of being in a cold place. As you can see, there was quite a lot of snow and we were quite freezing there. So I'm gonna bring some blues in the shadows of this image. Same thing in the midtones. And I'm gonna do the same thing also with the highlights. We go for a monochromatic color grading that is going to cool down the whole image. Okay, let's now move on to the calibration tool. And here we can change now how the color look in our image. And I want to go for a very limey, acidic kind of green. This is very common in Iceland and I want to try to recreate that kind of green. So I'm gonna bring my green primary almost all the way to the left. I think -85 looks quite nice. So I'm gonna bring it here. Then I'm gonna increase the saturation of the yellows. So I'm gonna bring the saturation of the blue primary all the way up. I think +75 looks quite nice. If you don't know why raising the saturation of the blue primary actually increased the saturation of the yellows in the image, I would encourage you to watch my video about the calibration tool. You can find it on my channel. Go watch that and then come back on this one so that you understand what is going on here. By the way, if you're not subscribed to this channel, please consider to subscribe. It helps this channel quite a lot and it helps me to create more of this free content. Thanks a lot for that. It doesn't cost you anything to you, but it makes a big difference for me. Going back to what we were doing, so now we have brought the greens, we have shifted the hue of the green towards yellow, and we want to also increase the saturation of the greens here quite a bit. I would say +75 looks good here as well. I think I want to increase this even more, all the way to 100. And as you can see here, we have now a lot of saturation in our image. And if we would have done a lot more here in the basic panel, we would have just ended up with something that was too vibrant, too saturated. So actually, I'm gonna dial this down a notch because I think it's a little bit over the top. So I don't think I need the vibrance at all in this image. And this is basically all I would do in regards of colors in my image. Now, all the other panels that are below this one, I rarely touch them. I never add sharpening to my images. Again, I paid a lot of money to get the best gear that I could possibly afford. So I don't want to add sharpness to my lens that are already quite sharpened. And I don't want to do noise reduction unless my image is really noisy, because noise reduction is always going to impact the sharpness of your images. And if you have a sharp lens, you don't want to soften that up. When it comes to lens correction, I usually keep the remove chromatic aberration on, but for landscape, I actually remove the enable profile correction because I don't need to fix the barrel distortion, and I actually like the natural vignetting that I get from my lenses. So I only enable the profile correction if I have people in my images, but if it's a landscape, I don't need to do that. So that is shut off. Okay, moving on, we have the transform panel, and this is also a panel that I rarely use. I think it's most helpful if you do architectural photography where you have lines that have to be straight, but for landscape photography doesn't really make that much sense. So we can skip that one. When it comes to post-crop vignetting, I do add vignetting, but I do it with masks. They are a lot more powerful. You can create a more creative kind of vignetting, and we are gonna do this in just a moment. So I also skip the effect panel. The lens blur is just something that they added, but it's no good at all. And again, I have good lenses that do their job. They are more than capable to give me the nice depth of field that I want. And in this case, I want to have everything in focus, so that makes no sense at all. So let's move on to the fun part now, where we actually shape the light of our image. We are just halfway done with our editing. Now we are gonna create a lot more style in this picture just by using masks and doing some local adjustments that will make our photo come together. All right, so let's click on the mask tab here and let's start with a couple of linear gradients that are going to be inviting the viewer eye towards our subject, that is the lake. So I'm gonna create one big gradient here from the bottom up, and I'm gonna decrease the exposure here quite a bit to darken this area and create a little bit more three-dimensionality in the photo, and also a little bit the whites, since we have this patch of snow that is going to be too white in the foreground and it's going to be distracting. Same thing we do at the top, because I want to have multiple layers of clouds that are going to invite the viewer's eye again towards my subject. So once again, very big gradient, very soft, and let's darken this out quite a bit. Let's bring the shadows down, the whites down, and the blacks down as well, so that we have a very dramatic sky. This area here is now a little bit too bright compared to this area here. I want to have the same kind of darkness, so I'm gonna create another gradient. Let's go for a radial gradient this time. I think it's gonna work better for that area, and we bring this down also quite a bit. Something like that is looking pretty good. Then one more thing that I like to do is to actually take the color range here and select a neutral part of the image, and then just bring the black down here only of this color. As you can see, this is now not affecting my whole image, but only the color that I've selected with my color range tool, and that's gonna help to make the black more black only where there is basically just a neutral color, and that's gonna give a little bit more punch to this image. Now, as I said, I want to get a little bit more color from the lake, so to do that I'm gonna select with the color range again my lake, but as you can see, we select also a lot of stuff that I don't want to color actually, so I'm gonna intersect this mask with a object selection, and I'm gonna quickly paint over my lakes actually. Something like this should be enough. Yeah, we need to refine a little bit this mask since there are part of the lakes that have not been selected, so let's add a object mask here to get this piece that didn't go too well. I need a smaller brush, so object, and then let's include this area here, something like that, and then we can remove again with the object selection the road here. All right, and once again another object selection to remove the road here. Now I'm gonna do this very quickly, you guys have more time to do it properly, but the idea here is that now that we have a selection of only our lake, we can use the curves to recreate some of the color that is now gone. So let's bring the blue up a tiny bit, and I want to increase also the greens to have a more aqua kind of color. And there you go. Don't go over the top. As you can see, the image has a lot of clouds, and when there are clouds in a landscape, you can't really have super saturated colors, because it's usually the sunlight that creates saturation. So don't go over the top, try to stay in a range that doesn't look too fake. So the last thing that I would do is to add the point where my light is coming in from the clouds, and that's gonna help again to guide the viewer eye towards my subject. And since here we have this area of the clouds that is a little bit brighter, we can use that to be the source of this cone of light that we are going to point towards our lake. So I'm gonna create again another mask, and in this case it's gonna be a radial gradient. Let's make it a bit squishy. Yeah, we can change the orientation, and let's make it so that it points towards the lake, something like that. Now let's remove from this gradient the back part, the other way. So I want this to be starting exactly here where there is a little bit more light in the clouds. And let's shape this up a little better with a couple of more gradients. So something like that. Let's move this a little bit towards the center, perhaps not as wide. And then one more from the top. Again, subtract, linear gradient. And now we have this cone of light that is going towards our lake. I think we can go even further with this, something like this. And now let's increase the exposure of that a little bit and add some negative clarity to create that, not some negative clarity, but some negative dehaze to create that little haze that you can see when the sun hits the atmosphere on the ground. So something like that. Don't go over the top, don't exaggerate these kind of creative edits, because they're gonna look fake if you go over the top. So something like that I think looks quite nice. And here we have our final image. I'm gonna now go back to the normal panel and show you a before and after. Here we have the before. This is where we started, and here we have the final image after all of our adjustments. As you could see, I've done as minimal adjustment as possible at the very beginning of our editing, because I knew that I wanted to push the colors and the contrast with some local adjustments. So keep it easy here, don't go over the top, because the more gentle you are in this section, the more fun you can have when it comes to creative editing. All right, that was it for today, guys. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.